Ultralearning from Scott Young. How do you feel when you hear stories of people who learned the basics of a language in a month, who graduated in half of the time, or who could memorize an impressive amount of information? Do you feel like you are inferior because you don't have that ability? Do you envy those great brains? Do you think that what they do is impossible and that there is some trick behind those stories? Well, you must know that you are able to achieve similar things. You can learn in a faster way. You can use your brain in a much more useful way, even if you believe you weren't born with enough intelligence. All you have to do is to follow some principles that those people followed too. And if you learn how to learn, like they did, you're going to incredibly leap forward in the way you learn. In today's Arata Academy summary, we'll see 9 principles of fast learning which are described in detail in the book Ultralearning. Master hard skills, outsmart the competition, and accelerate your career by Scott Young. This book shows how common people, like you and me, manage to learn any kind of topic in an efficient and fast way when they followed the 9 principles that we're going to be discussing here. Principle number 1, meta-learning. First, design a map with your studying strategy. The first characteristic that defines people who learn fast is the importance that they give to meta-learning. Meta-learning is the art of learning how to learn. Most people, when they want to learn something, they go straight to read a book, to watch a video, or to attend a class about that topic. They start by trying to learn the subject itself. Now, people who learn fast, they don't do that. Before starting, they design a meta-learning map. They spend at least 10% of the time learning how to learn that topic. That meta-learning map seeks to answer 3 questions: why, what, and how. First, you must explain to yourself the reasons why you want to learn that topic. It might be a desire that you have to know something. It might be a skill that you need to develop for your job. It might simply be some compulsory subject from your school or university. And afterwards, you need to define exactly what you want to learn. Which are the specific points? What are the pieces that form those points? What knowledge do you need to emphasize? What points can you exclude? And finally, you're going to understand how you're going to learn that. What is the best method? Is it reading books? And which books? Is it practicing any skill? And how are you going to be practicing it? Is it taking exams? Which exams? Your map doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to show you the right direction for you to follow the correct path from the beginning of your journey. The idea is for you not to waste time learning useless things and checking out bad materials or using an inefficient learning method. You can watch the episode 175 of the series Hello, Sage Arata, so that you can get more information on how to design your meta-learning map. Now let's go and see principle number 2. Start now, continue, and always improve. Another characteristic that sets ultra-learners apart is the ability those people have to keep focused on their studies. In order to do that, you need to improve your ability to concentrate. See, in a current world full of distractions and cell phone notifications, the ability of staying focused only one thing, one task, this is incredibly rare. Those who do have that ability will most certainly stand out, not only on the learning field, but also in their professional career. The best way to develop this ability to focus is to divide your time into different blocks. And then you can focus exclusively on learning what you want to learn. Having a hard time to focus when you're studying usually is related to 3 problems: starting, maintaining, and optimizing. The first problem is starting to study. It is the famous procrastination, the habit of leaving for later what you should be doing right now. So, To overcome the problem of starting to study, you simply have to realize that you are procrastinating. When you've realized that you are procrastinating, try to convince yourself that you're just going to study for a couple of minutes before making a pause. Everyone can do something for 5 minutes, right? The trick is simply to get started. Once you get started, you can pick up the pace and end up studying much more than you actually had initially thought. And once you overcome the problem of beginning to study, the second step is to keep focused on your studies. That is, apart from studying, you have to keep on studying. If you manage to avoid the distractions, you're going to enter a state of flow and you'll start to have a much higher performance in your studies. You can watch the episode 134 of the series, Hello, Say Arata, if you want to understand better how all this whole flow state works. And here, once again, the technique of dividing the time into blocks can be very useful. When you schedule blocks of time to study and focus on your studies, you also need to plan your breaks, a time to enjoy. For example, you can separate periods of 50 minutes to focus on your studies, and then a 10-minute break after each block. Apart from that, try to study in an environment that doesn't foster distractions. Keep your phone away. Turn the TV off. Block web pages and social networks. If you get distracted easily, try to improve your mind. It is much more difficult to study with a mind full of anger and anxiety and frustration. In order to free yourself from these evils, you can try meditation, therapy, or any other practice that relaxes your mind. And after overcoming the difficulty of starting and solving the problem of continuing to study, now we're going to conquer the third and last problem, which is to optimize your focus. The problem is solved with practice. The more you practice the skill of keeping your focus on one topic only, the stronger that skill becomes. In order to optimize your focus, make sure you know where you are and start small. If today you can only concentrate for 5 minutes, it's fine. Try to keep focused for 10 minutes. Soon, those 10 minutes will become 15, 20, 50. By being a more focused person, you're going to be better at using the third principle of ultralearners, directness. This is principle number 3, directness. Go straight to the point. The third principle that all those who manage to learn fast, they have in common is directness. It is the ability to go straight to what matters. The fastest way of learning anything is to spend a lot of time practicing what you want to learn. The learning idea of directness is directly linked to the situation or the context in which you want to use what you're learning. For example, let's say that you want to learn a new language. Directness would mean to go straight to the point and starting to speak to a native speaker, to read books in that language, to write in that language. That's not what most people do. Usually when people want to learn a new language, what do? They start using those gamified apps. They watch lessons about fictional situations. They just take some multiple answer tests. And that principle applies to anything. If you want to learn how to code, the best way for you to do is to create a program of your own. If you want to learn how to draw, you have to start drawing. If you want to learn how to speak in public, you have to give a speech. The straighter to the point you go, the faster you will learn. And in case you feel that you are not prepared, remember that you're going to learn by doing things. The problem is that doing directly what we are learning is uncomfortable. It is difficult. It is frustrating. And that is why we prefer to spend our time reading books and watching videos, playing with apps. It gives us the impression that we are learning something, and at the same time we stay inside of our comfort zone. Going straight to the point is probably the biggest differentiating factor of the ultra learners. They go straight to what is interesting for them. And then, when they try to do something and they don't succeed, then they check out reference material to solve that specific problem. And then they go on. One of the challenges of this straight to the point learning is that sometimes you won't have access to the exact situation to which you'd like to apply your learning. For example, if you want to learn how to fly a plane, you won't be able probably to start actually piloting a plane. In those cases, what you need to do is to simulate the real experience as much as you can. And that way, when you find yourself in the real situation, you're going to be much better prepared than you would be if you had simply read some books or watched videos or lessons. Let's see here 4 strategies how you can apply this directness principle to your learning process. Directness principle strategy number 1 is project-based learning. One of the best ways for learning something directly is to carry out a project, to organize your studies inside of producing something, instead of just consuming didactic material to learn something abstractly in theory. For example, if you want to learn music, your project could be to compose a song. If you want to learn how to sell online, your project must be to publish a web page and make a sale. If you want to learn how to code, your project could be to create an app and release it. Even more abstract and less practical topics can also be a base for a project. For example, if you want to learn philosophy, you could have the project to publish an article. Now, directness strategy number 2 is immersion. The immersion strategy is very well known for language learning. People who spend years studying a language passively, usually they know less than those who make an exchange program and they live in a foreign country for 6 months. Immersion means to surround yourself with what you want to learn. And that forces you to practice for a much longer period of time. Besides language learning, you can also practice immersion by joining groups of people who are actively engaged in learning about something, or getting a job, even if it's not paid, in a field that you want to study. Directness strategy number 3 is the flight simulator method. Some of the knowledge areas don't allow you to practice directly when you want to learn. For example, flying a plane, performing surgery, or building an apartment block. You won't be able to accomplish all those things, at least not in the beginning of your studies. In these cases, you must use this flight simulator method. You must simulate the skill that you want to learn in a way as similar to reality as possible, but of course, maintaining everyone's safety. And that flight simulator method can also be used when immersion is not possible. For example, if you cannot go to China to learn Mandarin, at least you can change the language of your phone, of your computer, the videos you watch. You can try to speak to Chinese people on the internet. Whatever can simulate the real experience is valid, and it is going to accelerate your learning. Now, directness strategy number 4 is the challenging approach. The last directness strategy is to intentionally increase your learning challenge. You must design a great objective that contains in itself the whole skill that you want to learn. For example, if you start to learn a language today, and you already schedule a language proficiency test in 6 months from now, how about that? The challenging approach is going to put you in a high demanding position, and the idea is that the sole greatness of the challenge will prevent you from wasting your time studying things that are not relevant and never learning anything. Whatever the strategy you use is, the most important thing is for you to understand the principle. The best and fastest way of learning anything is practicing that topic in real life. Let's now see principle number 4, strengthening. Attack your weak points. You know, when you're learning something and at some point you find it hard, most of us tend to give up and avoid facing difficult things. Ultralearners do the exact opposite. They use the strengthening principle and they attack directly their weak points. The best way to strengthen your weak points is to break concepts or skills into smaller parts. Afterwards, you learn each one of these smaller parts. Only then you will put them all back together in order to understand the whole skill, the entire skill, or concept as a whole. When you don't attack your weak points, it can become draining. It can make your learning process slower. And that happens especially when those weak points are basic concepts, initial knowledge that form the foundations of other more advanced topics. Every time you study, try to find what are your weak points in that field. Write it down on your meta-learning map, and then start making the effort to learn it, spending blocks of time exclusively on each weak point. The sooner you identify those weak points, the better. Probably these weak points will come to light when you try to put your knowledge in practice. In these cases, you must begin to alternate between practice and strengthening. For example, let's say you're learning how to code, and then you start trying to code an app, and you find an obstacle with variables. That is a weak point that you need to study harder. Then you go back to the theory materials, you study that specific point until you manage to apply it actually into your project. The advantage of this method is that you will study more and the things that you actually need to learn, and you're going to waste less time studying what you already know. Every cycle of obstacle and learning will be a step forward in your journey. This principle requires you to be willing to expand your comfort zone by dealing directly with knowledge that you find difficult. The easiest way to apply strengthening is to create blocks of time and devote them exclusively to studying the identified weak points. Now, going back to our example, you understood that you had some trouble dealing with coding variables. Now, if you're going to select blocks of time, you'll be studying that topic alone, only that. Those blocks of time can be short, of 20 minutes, 5 minutes, can be longer, 50 minutes, 1 hour. In that set time, you need to put away all distractions and keep focused on the chosen weak point. If the weak point is very broad, you can try to break that weakness into smaller parts. Then dedicate blocks of time to each one of those smaller pieces. Principle number 5, retrieval. Try in order to learn. To learn something means to retrieve the information that you need. What is the best way of knowing whether you're able to retrieve information about the topic that you're studying? Well, by trying. Among the many ways of learning, the one that shows the best positive results is trying to retrieve information without consulting any material. Trying to retrieve facts and concepts from your memory without using books is more efficient, but it's also more difficult. That is why very few students use the retrieving technique as a studying method. Usually, students prefer more comfortable techniques like underlining, summarizing, drawing mind maps. In addition, a lot of students think that they don't have enough information to be testing themselves. They believe that they first need to read more material, write some summaries, and only later, only then, they will be ready to start testing whether they will be able to retrieve that information without consulting any material. Now, ultra-learners go a different way. They start testing themselves from the very beginning of their studies. They understand that retrieving information from their memory is one of the most effective means to learn anything. They understand that precisely because it is more difficult, that method implies better learning. Now, here's something important. The test can't be difficult to the point of the act of retrieving information becoming impossible. You can delay your test just a little bit, but you shouldn't delay it so much that you start to forget what you studied. Among the methods for retrieving information, the one that works the best is called the free retrieval test. In this test, you have to remember as much information as possible without checking neither questions nor answers. Basically, tell me everything you know about this. This free recall test will lead you to better results than tests with questions, alternatives, or answer tips. These all will provide you clues about what has to be remembered. The worst kind of tests are the recognition tests. Recognition tests are those of multiple choice that don't require a lot of reasoning, like the following one. How do you say apple in Swedish? Äpple. Then, when I say the word äpple, which image is correct, the right one or the left one? Well, you got it right if you said that the right answer is the correct image, but that didn't help much. This is a recognition test in which you just have to choose the right answer among multiple given answers. In those tests, you just need to recognize and not create information. That is why you learn less. In order to know what information you need to memorize, the best thing to do is to apply the directness method. If you go straight to the point and practice what you're learning, experience itself will show you what the most important information is. A simple and effective way of testing your ability to retrieve information is by using flashcards or spaced repetition. You can use special programs for that like Anki. You can watch the video on the series Study Arata to know more about spaced repetition, which is episode number 4. The negative point of flashcards is that they only work for a specific kind of learning based on questions and answers. If you're learning how to play guitar, for example, I think that flashcards will not be as useful. The more diverse the information is, the smaller the usefulness of flashcards. In those cases of very diverse information, the best way of applying the retrieval of information is trying to teach what you have learned. After you've studied a topic, try to write down everything that you remember about that subject without consulting any material. Imagine you had to teach that to a child. What information would you choose? This is one of the principles that we discussed in the Feynman technique, episode number 14. Another option is to change the way you take notes. Instead of taking notes and making summaries, try writing down questions. For example, at a history class, instead of writing down that the Magna Carta was signed in 1215 by King John Lackland, you can write it down. Who signed the Magna Carta? When? And that way you're creating material to practice the retrieval of information. If you're studying for something more practical like how to code apps or how to play the guitar, you can try to create challenges that can be solved later without consulting any materials. Retrieving information is the most effective way of fulfilling your studies, but that is only the half of a bigger cycle. After testing yourself, you need feedback. You need to know whether the information you provided or remembered is correct. In order to obtain it, you need to see the 6th principle of the Ultralearners: feedback. Principle number 6. Seek corrective feedback so that you can keep improving. Getting fast and continuous feedback is a habit that takes part of the strategy that a lot of the Ultralearners use. In a normal school situation, students wait too long to get feedback. Usually, students study a subject and only after 3 or even 6 months is that when they have the opportunity to take an exam and get feedback about what they learned. In fast learning, it is not possible to wait that long. You need to receive steady feedback about what you're learning. And when you don't get that kind of feedback of fast and precise details, the result is usually stagnation. You spend a long period of time studying about a topic and practicing ability without progressing. Sometimes a lack of feedback can even lead to a worse performance. But you have to be careful with the kind of feedback that you get. Some studies show that harsh criticism can have the opposite effect. In the same way, compliments to your ego can also end up damaging your learning process. The ideal thing is that feedback tells you what you're doing wrong, and especially how to correct that mistake. That is very different from the useless feedback like, "Oh, you're silly, you're never gonna learn," or "Wow, you're so intelligent." Our ego can hinder the process of feedback, even if we received high-quality feedback that told us what we did wrong and how we can solve the problem. A lot of students say that they get sad when they are criticized, even when it is constructive feedback. That is why they avoid trying to get any kind of feedback. The best thing is to go straight and take the most sincere and constructive feedback as possible. This can be obtained from a good teacher or through automated systems that evaluate your answers and show where you made a mistake. Both teachers and algorithms will basically give you 3 kinds of feedback. Feedback about the result, informative feedback, and corrective feedback. The feedback about the result is the most common one, and often is the only kind of feedback available. It is when someone evaluates the result of what you've done, your project, the grade in a test, the answer to a particular question. The informative feedback doesn't only analyze the result as a whole, but also specific parts of what you produced and even how you produced it. For example, you played the piece on a piano and your general result was good, but the teacher gave you feedback about how to better position your hands. Or you coded an app and the teacher realized that you could have gotten the result using a different, a more elegant code. The corrective feedback is the hardest to find, but is the one that can accelerate your learning the most. And that's the kind of feedback that you receive when you actually have a private teacher, a tutor, someone who has experience in the field you want to learn, and someone who's paying close attention to your learning process, showing you what to do and also what not to do. There are 4 different ways to obtain feedback. The first technique is to avoid interference and focus only on the useful information. For example, you received feedback that mixes some personal offenses and also some constructive criticism. So instead of you getting angry and ignoring the feedback completely, you learn to ignore the offenses and focus on the constructive parts. The second technique is to avoid completely positive feedback. That is, avoid asking your friends and your relatives about the results because they will only compliment you. Instead of that, you can try to get feedback from someone that you know is going to provide you better criticism. The third technique is the meta feedback. When you find it difficult to find someone to help you, you can use your own critical sense. Whenever you finish studying a subject or conclude a part of a project, you have to make a sincere self-evaluation. How was your performance? What could have gone better? Which are the weak points that need to be strengthened? The fourth and last technique is the highly intensified fast feedback. Try to increase the quantity, the frequency, and the speed of your feedback. Instead of asking one person's opinion, you can ask 10 people, 15, 20 people. This technique has an advantage because we don't want to show any weak points of ours to so many people. In that way, we also make an effort to learn better and more. No matter what technique you will use, once you've received high-quality feedback, you need to focus on retraining what you learned. And that is the next principle that the ultra learners use. Principle number 7, retention. Don't fill a leaky bucket, you need to retrain the information. Being able to master an ability or to learn how something works is useless if you can't retain that knowledge. In order to retain information better, you need to use some strategies so that knowledge doesn't escape your mind as water in a leaky bucket. First, we need to understand why we forget what we learn. The forgetting curve shows that we tend to forget quickly what we learn. There is an exponential reduction in our knowledge, especially in the beginning. Later, that loss of knowledge decreases with time. One of the most effective strategies to retain information is the spaced repetition system. We space the study sessions in several intervals during the duration of our learning process so that we don't forget what we're learning. Programs such as Anki help us to control the breaks between study blocks. And with skills that can't be practiced with flashcards, you need to practice some other way. Creating procedures, deliberate practice, and specific routines. Of course, not all knowledge can be transformed into procedures, so you might need overlearning. With overlearning, you learn much more than necessary. In this way, what could be advanced knowledge ends up becoming more basic knowledge. And that more basic knowledge is going to be difficult to forget. For example, you want to learn how to learn the basics of a coding language to use at work. With overlearning, instead of learning only the basic skills that you will use, you learn how to code in an advanced way in that code language. This way you learn the basics in a way that it will be very hard to forget. There is also another strategy that goes very well in the field of retention, which is mnemonics. Mnemonics is a series of techniques that help us to remember something. For example, we make diagrams or symbols or words or sentences related to the topic that we're learning. The stranger the relation is, the hardest it will be to forget. Principle number 8, intuition. Intuition is the ability to process a great amount of information in a small period of time. Intuition is acquired through experience. The eighth principle of ultralearners is the most abstract of all, intuition. Intuition is hard to explain, but in the learning field it can be defined as a way of thinking based on principles. For example, when an experienced mathematician faces a difficult problem, he shows that he needs to use the general principles of mathematics before examining the details of the problem. Just thinking about the basics, the mathematician knows in advance which options to consider and which ones to reject when trying to solve the problem. Intuition tends to come with experience. The more time you spend learning a topic, the more intuitive things will be for you. Sometimes intuition seems to be magic, but it's actually something much more ordinary. It is simply the production of a huge amount of information in a short period of time. That makes your brain find shortcuts when it needs to learn something new inside that knowledge area. In order for you to start developing your intuition, you can't give up when you're facing difficult problems. When you find something that is beyond your knowledge, don't give up. Insist more than you should. Usually insist to see if your brain manages to solve that problem intuitively, even without having all the necessary specific knowledge. The second rule is trying solutions to be able to say that you understood them. Instead of applying simply a formula or using a solution created by someone else, try to recreate the way the other person achieved that solution formula. That may take time, but it is going to create a much deeper knowledge than if you simply applied already created solutions. The third rule is to always start with a specific example. Even in a field or a subject in which you're studying, if it is something more abstract, try to think about an analogy in the real world so that your brain considers some problems and solutions more intuitively. The fourth rule is not to fool yourself. Always be specific towards your understanding of the subject. Did you really understand what you're studying? Or are you just willing to go ahead and finish your studies as fast as possible and say, it's okay, it's done? If you didn't understand completely, you may end up being a victim of the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect happens when someone has a partial understanding of a subject, believes he knows more than other people, than someone else who actually understands that topic. The Dunning-Kruger effect happens because the more you study something, the more questions you have about it. While someone with basic knowledge has more certainties, advanced students have more doubts. We've already seen that in the Feynman technique. If you're not able to teach what you learned to a child, then you probably didn't understand the topic completely. And now we're going to see the last principle that those who learn to manage to learn in a fast way, in an efficient way, is experimentation. Principle number 9. Experimentation. Explore beyond your comfort zone. The last of the 9 principles ultralearners use is experimentation. We talked about this experimentation principle slightly in our discussion about the use of the scientific method for the resolution of your personal problems. Experimentation is one of the steps of the scientific method. Remember, observation, formulation of hypotheses, experimentation, and then analysis of results. The same way scientists make experiments to find the best solution to a problem, you must also use experimentation as a key to become a true master of the topic that you are studying. When you start to study or to learn something, usually you only need to follow the steps of someone who has already learned that topic already. You follow a book, a course. You even replicate a success case. You learn the basics. Nevertheless, if you want to advance, become a master, maybe even surpass your teachers, you're going to need experimentation. You need to experiment in order to find the best solution to your case. And in this journey, you will start to have your own ideas. Maybe you even have to be disagreeing with your old masters, your old teachers. That is how new knowledge is created, especially in those fields that require creativity. There are 3 ways to experiment. The first way is to experiment with different learning materials. If you always studied following one method, try to use another method. If you always used books, try attending presential face-to-face classes. If you always follow the teacher, follow another teacher who has an opposite approach. The second way is to experiment with different techniques. If you're learning something more practical, like learning how to paint or how to play bagpipe, you can try using different techniques to see if you get better results. The third way is to experiment with different styles. If you always studied classic guitar, try studying more modern styles. If you always studied American cinema, try studying Iranian cinema. If you studied how to write poetry, try studying how to write novels. Experimenting is not easy, but precisely because it broadens your comfort zone, experimentation brings you excellent results. It is as if you are making a completely new level by going from knowing a topic to mastering it. And to do that, you need to have a mentality of growth. You need to understand that your brain evolves as it learns and adapts to new knowledge. That understanding can be taken into practice with some specific techniques. One well-known experimentation technique is to copy first and then create. That is, you copy what other people do and then you use that as a starting point to experiment, starting something different. When you do that, you're bound to deconstruct about the previous work and have an idea how it is made. Another experimentation technique is to compare methods side to side. If there are two ways of learning the topic that you're learning, put these methods next to each other and compare them. What do they have in common? What is different about them? How can I use the best of each one in order to create a method that I made by myself? That is yet another experimentation technique that consists on placing restrictions to your own study. One of the greatest learning challenges when you're advanced is that you start to think about everything that you already know what to do. That is the famous knowledge curse. A good way of breaking that knowledge curse is to leave that state of, I know that already, by placing restrictions that make old methods basically impossible to use. For example, if you're learning how to code, and you've always solved a problem by using 100 lines of script, now you can force yourself to solve the same problem using 50 lines of code. That kind of restriction makes you experiment with new solutions, and that way you broaden your mastery of that particular topic. You can also experiment by mixing different abilities that are not really related. That can make you stand out from other students in that same field. For example, a chemical engineer who learns how to speak in public can have a professional advantage over another chemical engineer who has the same knowledge in that field of chemistry, but who knows nothing about public speaking, about oratory. Finally, you can experiment with high specialization. If you learn to know a bit of everything, it can make you to stay in mediocrity. For example, let's say you are studying physics. If you want to be good at classical mechanics, quantum mechanics, thermodynamics, electromagnetism, and relativity all at the same time, you will probably stand out in none of them. It might be better if you choose one of these fields and find a specific top within it, so you can try to go all the way through it, whatever your experimenting technique is. The important thing is to be sure that experimentation is the principle that brings all 9 principles of ultralearning together. After all, learning isn't but a big experiment in which you acquire knowledge a lot of times through trial and error. Start your first ultralearning project. Since you follow this Arata Academy summary until this point, you must be very interested in knowing how to learn more and better. In some way, learning is very important to you. The book Ultralearning makes it very clear that accelerated learning projects aren't always easy, but they're certainly possible. It is not necessary to be a genius in order to learn things in a faster way, faster than other people. You only need to have a method. And that method can be divided into 5 practical steps. The first step is doing more research and designing your meta-learning map. The second step is preparing a calendar. It is having clear deadlines to learn each topic defined in the map and planning the necessary time during your week to study. The third step is implementing a plan. Knowing that no plan is perfect, you should start with what you have today and improve as time goes by. The fourth step is analyzing your results. When your plan of studies ends, evaluate what went well and what didn't. The fifth and last step is deciding what you're going to do with the knowledge that you obtained. You can choose to maintain, to relearn, or to master what you learned. All knowledge decreases with time when it is not used. That is why I'm asking you, what are you going to do when you finish your studies? The first option is to maintain your knowledge without any goal in mind, without any desire to take that knowledge to a new level. And to do that, you just need to practice that skill every day a little bit, so basically you won't forget it. Now, the second option is to relearn it. Sometimes the cost of relearning something is smaller than the cost of maintaining it, that knowledge over time. So you accept the fact that you are going to forget it. And in case you need to have that knowledge again in the future, you just need to quickly relearn it. The third option is to master what you learned. It is going deeper into that topic that you learned, becoming a true master in that field. That can be accomplished through ongoing practice or by following a new Ultralearning project, this time with deeper knowledge. Regardless of your choice, what you must keep in mind is that you are able to learn anything. You just need to follow the 9 principles that you learned here in this summary and apply the most effective study techniques that have been discovered by science. In a course, How to Learn Faster, we see in detail what these techniques are. And particularly, we'll see how you can put these techniques into practice in your everyday study. So then, you can master the art of accelerated learning. That is why I invite you to watch, right now, a special class from the How to Learn Faster course at arata.se/how to learn.